Photo illustration intelligence officer. Photos Tim Scott and Nikki Haley don't appear to have suffered an election defeat by selling snake oil supplements on a podcast monitored by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Both would feel at home in the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush or Mitt Romney. Neither has any obvious affection for Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin. Both are staunch supporters of Ukraine's defense and the broader ambitions of the Republican foreign policy establishment. For these reasons, both are coded as relatively moderate in the GOP's 2024 presidential primary. The tendency to classify Republicans ideologically by their closeness to Trumpism, so that those most aligned with former president and his heterodoxes are on the far right, while those more aligned with GOP old guard are moderates, has always been misguided. Trump and his aides are, of course, uniquely radical in some important ways. Anyone who apologizes for an uprising can rightly be described as a reactionary. But in some policy areas, Trump's apparent positions are less extreme than Mitch McConnell's. For example, former president's outspoken opposition to rights cuts and a federal abortion ban places him to the left of median Republican on these issues. Meanwhile, Haley and Scott's financial priorities place them on the far-right fringe of American public opinion. Haley has called for raising the eligibility age for Medicare and Social Security, which only 15% and 10% of U.S. voters support, respectively. According to a recent AP-NORC poll, Scott approved similar changes to entitlement benefits. As governor of South Carolina, Haley also took a stance against expanding Medicaid coverage households just above the poverty line. He chose to forgo free federal funds and effectively defund rural hospitals in favor of denying health care low-income people. Scott, meanwhile, sought to kick millions off Medicaid rolls by voting to repeal the Expansion and Gut Affordable Care Act. A Kaiser Family Foundation poll earlier this year found that in 10 states where Medicaid has not yet been expanded, voters support expanding Medicaid by a 65 to 34% margin. Scott and Haley's fanatical commitment to maintaining historically low tax rates for the wealthy and corporations also puts them outside the American mainstream. When asked earlier this year to name their biggest frustration with current tax system, the most common complaint voiced by more than 60% of Americans was that corporations and wealthy don't pay their fair share. Finally, Scott's utter disdain for striking UAW workers puts him against 75% of voters who say they side with the union over management in dispute. According to Morning Consult survey. All that said, even if we ignore the radicalism of normal Republican economic views, Scott and Haley would hardly qualify as center-right. Both made that clear in Wednesday night's debate at the Reagan Library. While cops